How important is accessibility when it comes to general elections?
Everyone has their right to vote. Everyone has their right not to vote. But everyone should be given that option to have that choice.
When someone is talking to someone with hearing loss, whether it's on the doorstep, whether it's in a meeting, whether it's at the polling booth, make sure you're looking at them. Eye contact is so important.
Staff within had to come out with a voting slip for me to fill in, and the box for me to put the vote into.
I'm getting through the post these manifestos the print is really small, the words are quite complicated, the language is quite complicated. That excludes a number of the population.
Just because maybe they're struggling with English now doesn't mean they shouldn't get a say in who their MHKs are.
I'm Beth Espey, and this is Access All Areas, which came about as part of Manx Radio's coverage ahead of the House of Keys general election this September. We've been trying to make sure that on the Manx Radio election website, the information that voters need is as accessible as possible, which got me thinking about how easy or not it can be for people living with a disability or for those who don't speak English as a first language to actually exercise their democratic right to vote, something which I think many of us probably take for granted.
My name is Dewan Gregor. I'm a guide dog user in Peel. I'm registered blind. I've spent quite a few years across in the UK doing various studies in Hereford and Preston respectively, so I've had chances to vote across. I'm very interested in making voting accessible for everyone, not just accessible for certain groups, but accessible so that everybody has the right to exercise their vote. When I came into the polling station, they hadn't even heard of tactile voting slips, and we had no tactile voting slips.
Can you explain what that is?
So the way that it works across is that for blind people to vote privately and independently, you'll have what's called a tactile voting slip. This is a piece of plastic that has holes cut out of it that is laid on top of the paper, so it would block out the name, or it might kind of highlight the name. You might have a square for your first vote and a circle for the second vote. So I just need to feel for the square, tick next to that, and then feel for the circle and tick next to my second vote. As I said, in 2011, we hadn't had any of that training on the Isle of Man, and that didn't exist. So when I entered the polling station, they closed the doors behind me and my mum. They waited for the rest of the public to exit the polling station, and I instead had the constituents read out by the returning officer, and I gave my vote vocally and verbally. The returning officer then checked it with the representatives to make sure that they had done what I'd asked, and then the doors were reopened and my mum and I left, which completely removes my right to a private ballot. And it leaves me with absolutely no respect because I couldn't do it privately and independently.
And that's the thing, you are an incredibly independent person,
Yes.
And you want to be able to do these things yourself.
Absolutely, and there's no reason why I shouldn't be able to do these things. It was a lovely adjustment that they meant that I actually could vote. I wasn't turned away from the polling station, but in the same aspect, I had no right to a private ballot. Even my mum knew who I'd voted for, and my mum and I are very open about this. But if I'd wanted to have a private vote ballot, the option wasn't there. In the 2016 election, I was actually heading across to university, so I registered for a postal ballot. And at that point, we did have tactile voting slips in, and that was much better. And it was a much more fluid process. And I really hope that the government has taken that to heart and they've installed tactile voting strips around the Isle of Man with all of the returning officers in the polling stations.
Can I just ask you how your experience of voting in the UK was?
My experience of voting in the UK was absolutely brilliant. I turned up to my local polling station without needing to make myself known to them beforehand, but I turned up on the spot. The returning officer came over, guided me to the booth, already had tactile voting slips to hand and knew how to use them, and I was able to do it safely, independently and privately, which is everything that I really need to make me feel dignified.
My name is David Bromelow. I'm currently visiting the island to see my friend and see this beautiful place, and I was involved with the Kellogg's project in making packaging more accessible for visually impaired people, which is going ahead in the next couple of years. So one of the major things that we do in the UK is We have a voting guide, which is just like a sheet of card with a few boxes on it that are cut out, and somebody will obviously read what candidates are there and then in what order, and then obviously you can just tick accordingly in the corresponding box. You know, something like elections is something that somebody should be able to do completely independently, because it's your voice and you should definitely be able to do your vote in secret, and nobody else should be able to know who you're voting for.
I wonder how geared up candidates in any election are for thinking about people who might have visual impairments and might not be able to read the manifesto, because I'm guessing if you can't read the manifesto, you're not going to vote for them, are you?
Yeah, to be fair, one of the things I always look for when I get any voting materials through the post is I check to see whether their website has a copy of it and in what format. If you're somebody looking for my vote, make sure that you've got as many different formats as possible. Yeah, fair enough, you may not be able to send them through the post, but is there somewhere online where I can listen to your manifesto, where I can request a large print manifesto, where I can just speak to somebody and ask direct questions about your manifesto? If you want my vote, you make sure you're as accessible as possible.
I'm Ailish Gregor. I'm an independent speech and language therapist. I am really passionate about easy read or accessible information, and when I'm getting through the post these manifestos that are, the print is really small, the words are quite complicated, the language is quite complicated, that excludes, I think, a number of the population. And if you're trying to encourage more people to vote, I think you need to be making this accessible to ensure that everyone who can vote. And I think it's all about informed choice as well. So I think that every candidate should be doing it, because if you only have one or two creating accessible information, then again, that's not an informed choice. You're not giving people the full breadth of every candidate that they could vote for. So really, I think everyone should, to create that opportunity to be able to vote like the rest of us can, when we can all read every manifesto. I use easy read and accessible information for people with a learning disability or autism who have every right to vote in these elections and should be encouraged to vote in these elections, but equally it can be used for anyone, people who have dyslexia, people who have English as an additional language. And I love an easy read. I read easy reads myself. I just think information being more accessible is just easier for everyone.
So you're going to have to explain to us then what an easy read actually is.
Yeah, so there's some specific guidelines on creating an easy read. They can be found on the internet if you just Google it. But what it is there's usually pictures, and the pictures relate to the information that you're giving. So there'll be one sentence with a picture that directly relates to it. The font is usually bigger, the language is usually simplified, but not in a way that's patronising, in a way that's just clear. And you don't need to use all this complicated language. If you could say it in the most simple way, why not just do that? So there's one sentence and a picture. It's really broken down. It's just keeping it really clear with the salient points. And I love the fact that you can add pictures in, so you can make it personalised. So when I create easy reads for the people I work with, I try and use personal pictures. It might be a picture of them, or it might be a picture of maybe the day centre that they go to. If you're creating an easy read manifesto, you can put a picture of yourself on it. You can put a picture of yourself, canvassing, or you can put a picture of the polling station. You can make it as personalised as you want. It's so flexible.
You're listening to Access All Areas on Manx Radio, exploring the issue of accessibility ahead of the Keys general election this September. In a moment, we'll find out some of the issues facing people living with hearing loss. But first of all, what about issues of accessibility if you're living with a physical disability? Stephen has been a wheelchair user for the past 8 years.
I contacted the Isle of Man government with regards to accessibility because my local polling station during the last election had no wheelchair access. And I thought, well, with the election coming, if they were made aware of it now, it's better than being told the day before that there's an issue. So I contacted the Isle of Man government. My email was passed on to a member of the Clerk of Tynwald's office, and they responded quite positively that they were already looking into this and that they would get it sorted.
Just tell us, Stephen, what happened then back in 2016? How did you, first of all, find out that there was an issue?
By attending the polling station and finding as a wheelchair user I couldn't gain access because there were 2 large steps between the pathway and the doorway of the building. The staff within had to come out with a voting slip for me to fill in, and the box for me to put the vote into.
And from your point of view, how did that feel, being put in that position where you had to cast your vote, exercise your right to vote in that way?
It felt like not every member of the community had been thought about. It was just a case, there's a building, some people can get in, that will do. So I'm hoping this year, as per information I've received from the Clerk of Tynwald's office, that there will be a ramp in place. They are still using the same building this year, so fingers crossed, everything will be as they said it will be.
And something else you found out is that they have purchased some new polling booths, which also hopefully will make life for you a little bit easier.
Yes, and apparently they'll be easier for the staff at the polling stations as well, because they're easier to put up and fold down. And they can adjust the height of the table within the voting booth to be at height for someone standing, or height for someone in a wheelchair, or someone who's of shorter stature. It's very important because it means that everybody in the community has the same rights and the same access and the same means to be able to go out and cast their vote.
I'm Lucy Buxton, and I am the Chief Executive Officer of the Manx Deaf Society. There are all sorts of challenges, both in the run-up to polling day and on polling day itself. If we think of people with hearing loss like myself, one of the main ones is actually trying to understand what people are saying. Now, if you're given a written leaflet or flyer or manifesto from someone, you can take it away and read it for yourself, and that's really helpful. But if you're attending a meeting where someone's speaking, or if someone is coming to the door face to face, that is where the challenges can start occurring. Also, radio, TV, any sort of online interview at all. The issue is not being able to follow what someone is saying. So if someone's coming to your doorstep, normally you'd be able to have a good conversation or even invite them in. But in these days with the pandemic, people might be turning up wearing masks. You don't particularly want to invite people into your home because of that risk of spreading any infection they may or may not be carrying. So that reduces someone's ability to actually find out about what their local candidates are actually offering and to ask them what they're doing. So the next thing would be, okay, well, let's go to a meeting. Sounds brilliant. However, people like myself find it very hard just following what someone is saying. I have hearing aids and they are great, but they amplify everything that's going on in the room, not just the voice of the speaker. So a room where there is a hearing loop for someone with a hearing loop capability on their hearing aids, that's brilliant, because that means that you get to hear what somebody's saying. Alternatively, having the option for somebody with hearing loss to sit closer to the front, just like you might with a wheelchair user, you'd have possibly a special area where there is more accessible for them. For someone like me, sitting closer to the front so I can lip read, that's hugely important. Thinking about the room where the talks are taking place is also a big one. Very large, echoey rooms with hard floors and surfaces, so that anytime anyone has a bit of a wriggle, you get the sound of a chair scraping. It all throws you off and you miss that little bit of what someone's saying. When you come to things like interviews, the ability to either have captions on a video or to have a transcript is so important, because it gives someone the chance to reflect on what has been said. So many people use captions or subtitles, but sometimes they go so quickly you can't actually follow what's being said. So to have a transcript as well or instead is hugely helpful. And then you come to polling day itself. You turn up, you want to vote, you've decided you're going to vote, you're doing your civic duty, and you turn up and everyone's wearing a mask and you can't quite understand the directions of where you have to go, which booth you have to go to, which desk possibly you have to go to for which part of your ward you're in. So having a little bit of compassion and thought for people first. Signage is hugely important. For someone, if they take the time to demonstrate that, they do need a bit of extra support, it could be that they're wearing sunflower lanyard to signify they have a hidden disability. Of course, it's not necessarily just for hearing, but it can be. Having the time to say, I can see you wearing a lanyard, do you need any extra support? That's very helpful. If someone could take their mask down while still remaining a good distance so everybody feels secure, then that's really helpful. And then we come on to our sign language users. We have a small group of sign languages users here on the island, and they want to take part, they want to be a part of the community. Simple language is best for our sign language users. If you imagine, it's hard enough if you've got some, I don't know, schoolgirl French, for example. I remember doing French when I was at school. It's very rusty. I could probably pick out of a newspaper maybe one word in 10. It can be like that for some of our sign language users too. So for them, simple language. And again, if you're meeting someone who's a sign language user, some of the best things you can do, and this goes for hearing loss people like myself, slow down a bit, take your time, don't gabble away, especially if you're getting a bit nervous or you're thinking, I've got to get this message across. Take the time to allow people to think about what you're saying, allow for some pauses. I'm very aware that that's exactly what I've just done now. I think my speed has slowed down quite a bit. People do get anxious and they do speed up when they're talking and when they get excited, but having that ability to slow down. If someone asks you to repeat something, try to repeat it exactly as you've said it, because it's a bit like having a jigsaw puzzle. Someone said something, you've got maybe half, 3/4, but there's just a bit you weren't quite sure of. If you ask someone to repeat and they give you an approximation of what they've just said, so they've sort of rephrased it, it can be useful, but not straight away, because if they do it straight away, you've basically got a new jigsaw puzzle to start with. If you repeat the first time and they're still struggling, that's when you can then rephrase, maybe simplify it. If in doubt, write something down. Obviously not the whole sentence word for word, just brief notes will be useful. But taking the time and trying to engage and showing that you're interested. And when someone is talking to someone with hearing loss, whether it's on the doorstep, whether it's in a meeting, whether it's at the polling booth, make sure you're looking at them. Eye contact is so important. In meeting times as well, quite often questions are taken from the floor. The speakers are probably mic'd up so everyone in the room can hear. However, that doesn't mean that the people in the audience can be heard. So somebody being in charge and monitoring that and having the ability to answer the question by actually using the question as part of their answer. I remember it was what I used to teach my children to do when I used to work in schools. Use the question as part of your answer. And it helps, because that way the person sitting there knows, oh, they've asked that question, oh, that was really good, right, and what are they actually saying about it? So all those sorts of things are very helpful.
Accessibility is not just about those living with a disability, though. What about those people for whom English is not their first language? On the Manx Radio website, we've tried to translate some election information into as many languages as possible. Amelia and Amelia are both Polish, and they've translated the Polish section for us. And they told me just how important it is for this sort of information to be accessible for people who've lived here for long enough to vote, but might not know how to.
I came to the Isle of Man for the first time in about year 2, I think it was. And we've stayed here ever since. It's been great. I've moved back to Poland for 2 years for a little bit, just to get my education up and kind of learn the basics of Polish. And then I carried on my Polish education here. I started doing Polish lessons over here just to kind of keep it up, because we thought that just speaking Polish at home wasn't enough.
We moved over here on my 4th birthday actually, and we've just been here ever since, but we'd go back to Poland for summers, obviously, because all our family stayed over there. And apart from that, we'd speak Polish at home, and my parents would really make an effort to correct us and make sure we were using the correct grammar and that we didn't mix our languages. And, after that, I'd just done, Polish GCSE and Polish A-level, because it was quite important to both me and my parents that we kept it up and didn't just abandon it completely just because we moved over here.
So what we're talking about is the House of Keys general election, which is coming up in September. So first of all, Amelia, how clued up would you say you are generally about politics in the Isle of Man?
To be honest with you, and until we've been corresponding back and forth about this, I didn't know a lot. I didn't know that I could register. I didn't know too much, but now I'm educated myself, and I know way more, and I definitely will register to vote.
I've actually been registered to vote since I was about 16, but I've never voted quite yet, just because it's quite confusing, some of the politics here, because it's not quite like in the UK. Like, you don't have political parties and, you know, all that kind of stuff. You just have individuals running to be elected, and I feel like it would take a bit more research to be able to make an informed choice about who you're voting for, because you don't have like a party who tend to have set goals or principles. You have to really look at what this specific person wants to do for the island.
Would you know who your two MHKs are right now?
No.
So that's really interesting, isn't it? And they kind of think, well, you are both very young.
18.
Yeah. I guess maybe there's a feeling when you're that sort of age that politics isn't really relevant to you, or perhaps it's the fault of the candidates who actually haven't made it relevant for you.
I think they just need to aim a bit more at the younger audience. I think it's very much, the target audience is very much older people. I do see like little flyers and stuff around, but I never think to look at that or to stop and read. I think maybe just putting it more on social media, because people our age are very much engaged on social media and stuff, so maybe just putting their word out there on social media. I think that would be a great way to start and get us involved.
And are your family politically engaged? Have they gone out to vote, do you know?
I don't think so. Like, I think they know what's going on, but it's more just like, at least from what I've seen, it's more like if they want to vote for a candidate, they need to be like really convinced of them and like what they stand for, and there's just not been anyone like that. And the reason that we're talking today is because you've very kindly done a translation for us, which I suppose is another barrier for some people for whom English isn't their first language. And I wonder how important you feel it is that that information is conveyed in as many different languages as possible, to make sure that people who live in the Isle of Man feel that they are part of it and they are being encouraged to go out and vote. How important would you say that is? I feel like it's very important because, like we've just read in the information, if you've lived here for 12 months before the voting date, you can register to vote. And I feel like quite a few people would fall into that, but maybe their English isn't up to the standard they need to be able to find this or to be able to understand what's happening. So it's important that it's out there and it's accessible to these people, because just because maybe they're struggling with English now doesn't mean they shouldn't get a say in who their MHKs are.
I think definitely a lot of people would be involved in this type of thing in Poland, because obviously they know the language and stuff, but everything's changed over here because obviously everything's a bit more complicated for them. So I think this will definitely help and engage more people and invite a bigger audience to get themselves involved.
Amelia and Amelia. Well, we've covered a lot of areas over the past 20 minutes or so, but the really positive news is that a lot of the issues raised have been considered ahead of the Keys election this September. For all the information, go to manxradio.com, click the link for the election website, and then head to Access All Areas. But essentially, there will be tactile voting slips at every polling station, there will be clear signage and instructions in every polling station, and there will be those new adjustable voting booths that we heard about. But perhaps the most important message from the Crown and Elections Office, which is organising the Keys election, is this one. Frank Carolyn heads up the team.
We spoke to the Manx Blind Welfare Society, who were extremely helpful, and one of the pieces of advice that they gave to us was not to assume anything. So anybody that's coming into the polling station, a simple question of, do you need any assistance when voting, is something that we will ask all the returning officers to relay to the polling staff on the day. Not everybody will need it, but it's not making assumptions.
And perhaps that's what accessibility is all about, not making assumptions to try and make sure there won't be exclusions. Thank you so much for listening. And if there's an area you think needs to be covered ahead of the Keys election on the 23rd of September, email us at election@manxradio.com.